I'm Steve Harvey, the founder and president of the Transcendental Politics Foundation. The two most striking things about human existence are human genius and human folly. We have an amazing ability to create the most spectacular wonders imaginable on scales large and small, tangible and intangible. And yet we also have the most amazing ability to just screw it up, to create misery and suffering, to inflict brutality and injustice. Both of these are realities of human existence. And it's clear to anyone who is paying close attention that we are certainly capable of doing better than we are doing, at achieving, at realizing the fullness of our consciousness and of our humanity. We can do better. We can't do perfectly. We're human beings. We're primates, talking primates with some unusual abilities as a result of our unusual brains. But still, we're not going to completely transcend the nature of our existence. We're not going to create a flawless utopia, but we can do so much better than how we're doing right now. We are capable of doing better. We've proven that throughout history. In fact, one of the constants of our history is something that we call progress. It's not always positive. There's brutality and oppression and injustice woven into it, and we get better at committing brutalities and injustices. That's part of our progress, our technological ability to harm others in larger numbers and greater degrees. That's real. But we also have created amazing technological marvels that have enriched our lives and that have liberated us to do things we never before could have done. From primates on the African savanna, learning how to talk and make tools, we have become godlike in some ways. Our ability to manipulate nature for our advantage, to create sources of energy, to create ways of communicating, ways of producing things that we want, to create wealth, to create health, to eliminate poverty. We actually are doing a pretty incredible job to some extent on all of those levels compared to any other primate. And it's pretty spectacular. But we can do so much better. And we can avoid doing the harm that is woven into our history as well. And that's what I'm here to talk with you about. Clearly, throughout history, we've made attempts. People, inspired people, motivated people, passionate people have made attempts. They've started world religions. They've started intellectual, philosophical movements and the scientific revolution. Throughout history, we've tried to do better. And that has been a big part of why we have done better than we did previously. But we are still on that journey. We are still on that path. We are still struggling with this dual nature, this ability to create incredible wonders that liberate us in unimaginable ways, and incredible horrors that inflict unnecessary suffering and hardship on multitudes, absolutely in ways that could be avoided if we simply dedicated ourselves to avoiding them. And this is the duality of our existence. So we are constantly struggling with this. We are in a constant um, endeavor together of accentuating our ability to create liberating, beneficial wonders, and to accentuate our ability to restrain ourselves from committing horrible atrocities and inflicting pain and suffering on one another. This is our mission in life. This is the human endeavor. This is what we're doing. This is why we created, in the United States, why we created our government, our Constitution. For Christians, it's why Christ came to you and taught you. It's the reason for all of our efforts to do better as human beings. And it's a continuing effort. It's not something that was done once and for all at some time in the past and perfected. It's something that we all are called upon to continue doing. And that's really what transcendental politics is. Transcendental politics is taking what we've learned over the millennia of our existence, and particularly in the modern era, taking it all, looking at what works, looking at what doesn't work, focusing on procedures and methodologies more than on conclusions, getting together, making our common ground an agreement that we're going to strive to be reasonable people of goodwill. We're going to try to mobilize reason and imagination and empathy and humility, all in service to our shared humanity. That will be the thing we try to do and continue to try to do, not just with current knowledge, but creating new knowledge, making that our discipline, refining our ability to engage in this ongoing endeavor of ours. And this is what I'm inviting you to do. I'm inviting you to check out our Facebook page, Transcendental Politics, or go to our website, transcendentalpolitics.org, or contact me at steve@transcendentalpolitics.org, and get to know what we're doing, become acquainted. And it's part of a much larger endeavor that many people are engaged in many different ways. There are wonderful organizations trying to transcend our tribal ideologies and tribal identities, inviting everybody to partake of the same endeavor, not making it about what your positions are on political issues or controversial issues, not making that the litmus test, just making the agreement to strive to be reasonable people of goodwill the litmus test. And each can arrive at their own conclusions, but let's cultivate that commitment. Let's cultivate that common ground of agreeing that we're going to strive to the best of our ability and help facilitate our own and others' attempts to do so, to be reasonable people of goodwill, to use reason, to use imagination, to use empathy, to be kind, to be humble, to know that our conclusions aren't necessarily right, no matter what ideology you adhere to. The things you think are true, some of them aren't. Absolutely, no matter who you are. Some of the things you think are true are not true. Some of the things you're absolutely certain are true are not true. That goes for me too. Some of the things I think are true are not true. Some of the things I'm absolutely certain are true are not true. And that humility is actually a key component that we're missing. We go into political discourse, each person certain that they have the truth, convinced that they arrived at it through the most diligent, reasonable processes, almost never that being the case, almost always, including scientists in areas other than their field of expertise. We form our beliefs through social processes. We have social tribal identities, people we identify with, people we feel comfortable with for various reasons, partly our childhood socialization, partly later socialization, later networks that we've been involved with, things that have emotionally appealed to us, things that have made us feel special, things that have made us feel like, yes, that's an attractive idea, that feels good to me. And that becomes a part of our identity. And then our positions are formed kind of within the cauldron, within the crucible of that identity. And it's not analysis. We're not going around analyzing. What we do in reality is we form our positions in the social, tribal, ideological way. And then, if we're diligent, we use reason to rationalize our positions. And we find evidence that supports what we already decided is true. We ignore evidence that refutes it. We form sometimes amazingly sophisticated arguments that someone paying less attention can't refute, in which we just mobilize whatever evidence, true or false, some of it's fabricated, but even if it's all true, we're selecting what supports our positions. That's not analysis. That's not humility. In the real endeavor of reason, you start with humility. You start with knowing that you don't know. And there's a need to discover the truth. And there's a need to use evidence, empirical evidence, and logical analysis, not to defend what you already know to be true, but to challenge what you currently think is true. That is the difference. When we get into the habit of challenging what we currently think is true And we do that in service to our shared humanity, that we're going to say, look, I want to follow the path that's going to serve humanity best in all ways, that's going to liberate us, that's going to enable us to live our fullest lives with the least constraints, with the whatever your notion of the good life is, whatever your notion of humanity's welfare is. Let us be reasonable about how to go about it, and let us be reasonable about our own limitations and our own limited understandings. So I invite you to come check us out. I invite you to take a look at what we're doing. I invite you to engage in the conversation. I chose to speak off the cuff instead of in a scripted way, because I just found that I could communicate more sincerely just by speaking to you instead of writing a carefully scripted speech that I would deliver with some intonation, but not in the moment. So I know this is a little bit rough and ready, but I just wanted to appeal to all of you who are listening to consider the possibility that the way to do better, the way to shift the balance in human history between the amazing wonders we create that liberate us and enhance our lives and the horrible atrocities we commit, even on an individual and smaller scale level, when we're just cruel to one another. To shift the balance between those two is a discipline. It's a discipline we can engage in. It's a discipline we can encourage others to engage in. It's a discipline those who are most motivated can get together and help to develop and refine and continue to create. And this can be our ongoing social movement to continue to refine and develop this discipline of being kinder, more reasonable, more imaginative, more humble, and more humane people. And bringing that to public discourse, bringing that to civic engagement, bringing that to political action where appropriate and when appropriate. This isn't really about electoral politics and campaigns. We're staying in a different sphere from that. That has to continue. That is important. That requires strategies and tactics, which aren't always nice. And I don't want to get into the questions of whether you have to hamstring yourself with a form of pacifism, a form of unilateral disarmament, when we're fighting battles that affect multitudes and have serious consequences. I mean, if you're fighting against racism, if you're fighting against brutality, if you're fighting against horrible dictatorships, if you're fighting against crimes against humanity, sometimes you have to fight. Agreed. Transcendental politics isn't about that. Transcendental politics is how we cultivate among as many people as possible, to as great a degree as possible, as much of a will as possible, to do better, to reduce the need for such fights, to move the ground underneath such fights, so that when we're fighting over doing better and doing worse, we're far in the direction of we're much further in the direction of doing better than we are now, and the fight is over a line that's way in that direction compared to where we are now. That's what we really want to accomplish. We want to move the ground beneath the political tug of wars that we're in, so that we're fighting over increasingly reasonable positions, increasingly humane positions, and ideally, both positions being extremely humane and extremely reasonable. People arrive at different conclusions. They're passionate about them, but it's always a reasonable, empathetic, kind, and humane position that they arrived at. And we're fighting over which one of these things that reasonable, kind, empathetic, humble human beings can believe, which one of them should we go with? That's where we want to get our formal politics to, our governmental and electoral politics to. And transcendental politics is about the ongoing struggle to move the ground underneath that other political arena. What else are we here for? What else are we doing? If you're religious and you love your God and you love what your God teaches you, and you love what you're commanded to do, this is just one more way to engage in that, just one more vehicle through which to do it. If you're not religious and you just want to live in a more rational world where people treat each other better and we govern ourselves in ways which are more humane and more liberating and more beneficial, um, then this is a vehicle for you as well. It's not one or the other. If you tend toward a more libertarian view where you think the less government the better, people should be free to pursue, that's fine. That's not an unreasonable way of looking at the world, as long as we're looking at it as a way to serve our shared humanity. And as long as we're taking into account what the costs are, what the costs and benefits are, and how do we mitigate the costs while harvesting the benefits. On the other hand, if you lean in the other direction where you think, look, we should use government as a tool for taking care of the poor and feeding the hungry and even if it means heavily taxing the wealthy and even reasonably heavily taxing people of just moderate, mild affluence. If you believe in that, you too need to consider what are the costs, what are the benefits, how do we mitigate the costs while harvesting the benefits? And as people do that, as people engage in that commitment to reason over ideology, that commitment to our shared humanity on all dimensions instead of ideology, those differences in ideological positions just begin to disappear because it's not about which one of those presumptions you begin with. It's about where does reason and imagination and empathy and humility and humanity lead us? And where does it keep leading us? Because both of those are products of people thinking about how to do better, but they're stagnant products. And we need to go beyond those stagnant ideologies that become tribes, that we become passionately invested in and hate each other over. We need to let those go. Let them go. They might continue to be your starting point. They might continue to be the direction in which you lean. But you know what? Let it go. Instead, say, I don't know. I don't know. I do know that I want human beings to be free. Or I do know that I want human beings to have a roof over their head and food on their plate and health care. Whatever it is that drives you to that ideology, get hold of the value, the thing that you care about, not the ideology, and include that in your pursuit of how to create a more rational, imaginative, humble, and humane world. So, I rambled on a bit, but I absolutely, strongly encourage you to check us out. I strongly encourage you to become involved. We have several different Facebook groups, starting with the Transcendental Politics group, and you can branch out from there, all with different purposes, all with different guidelines for different kinds of discourse. We are in our formative stages, but we're very excited, myself and my board members, and other people who have shown an interest and are participating. We look forward to this becoming a force in human history. There's no reason why it shouldn't, in one form or another, by one name or another. There's no reason why we shouldn't be trying to do better. There's no reason why we shouldn't make it a perpetual social movement. There's no reason why we shouldn't create a shared civic academy through which we teach each other and learn the skills by which we can evaluate complex information in service to our shared humanity. So come join us. Come be a part of it. Encourage others to be a part of it. And I really look forward to seeing you and talking with you soon. Thanks for listening. Cheers.